Why freedom terrifies people more than chains. Kierkegaard: we live in an age that worships freedom. We talk about it endlessly: freedom of speech, freedom of choice, freedom of identity. It's everywhere, on billboards, in political speeches, in every song that tells us to be ourselves. But here's the uncomfortable question: if freedom is so universally desired, why do so few people actually live freely? Why, when given the chance to truly choose who we are, do so many of us freeze, retreat, or simply conform? Søren Kierkegaard, arguably the father of existentialism, knew the answer. And he said it plainly: freedom terrifies us more than chains ever could. At first, that sounds absurd. How could freedom be frightening? Isn't it supposed to be the ultimate goal? But look deeper. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that absolutely nothing is stopping you from changing your entire life. You could quit your job. You could leave your relationship. You could move to another country, learn a new language, become someone else entirely. No one is physically stopping you. And yet you don't. Why? Because the moment you realize the sheer weight of your freedom, you also realize something darker: you are completely responsible for what happens next. That's what Kierkegaard meant. He didn't say people didn't want freedom. He said they were paralyzed by what it really demanded. We think of freedom as the absence of restrictions. But real freedom, the kind that goes all the way down, is the presence of infinite possibilities. And infinite possibility is not liberating. It's dizzying. Freedom forces you to confront the terrifying truth that there is no script, no pre-written destiny, no manual, just you, staring into the void of existence, with nothing but your own choices to shape what happens next.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
And that's why most people unconsciously choose chains. Not physical chains, but psychological ones. We cling to systems, roles, ideologies, and expectations because they give us structure. They give us identity. They tell us who we are, and most importantly, they spare us from having to decide for ourselves. Kierkegaard called this despair, not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, subtle despair of living a life that isn't truly yours. The despair of hiding behind masks, of following the crowd, of saying yes when your soul is screaming no. He said the most common form of this despair is to be someone other than yourself, to become so buried in societal roles that you forget you were ever free to begin with. But there's a deeper layer to this, and this is where Kierkegaard gets terrifyingly real. He says that freedom doesn't just terrify us because it demands responsibility. It terrifies us because it reveals our lack of grounding. The moment you realize you can choose anything, you also realize that nothing is inherently meaningful. There's no cosmic scoreboard, no guaranteed reward, no path that's objectively right. You're not just free to choose your actions, you're free to define what matters. And that kind of radical freedom is existentially overwhelming. Have you ever felt that kind of dizziness? Or that moment when you're faced with a big decision and suddenly, it's not just about picking option A or option B, it's about defining who you are. That's what Kierkegaard called the dizziness of freedom. It's that vertigo you feel when you realize that your life is yours to shape, but also yours to ruin. That your decisions aren't just practical, they're existential declarations. Every choice you make is a brushstroke on the canvas of your being. And that responsibility is so crushing that most people would rather hand the brush to someone else. So ask yourself, what decisions in your life have you actually chosen, but not inherited, not defaulted into, chosen? And how many of your beliefs, habits, and identities are just chains you've mistaken for freedom? That's the Kierkegaardian paradox. We think we're free because we can choose our brand of coffee, our Netflix show, our political tribe. But these are just surface-level options. The deeper freedom, the one that asks, what do I want to become? That's the freedom most people never touch, and yet it's the only one that matters. The mask of the crowd, why we trade inner truth for outer belonging. We say we want to be ourselves. We say we want authenticity. But most of us are terrified of what that actually means. Because to truly be yourself, to live from your own core convictions, your own raw sense of truth, means risking everything that makes you feel safe in the eyes of the world. It means potentially losing validation, community, reputation, and even love. That's why, as Kierkegaard saw so clearly, most people don't actually want individuality, but they want approval. And so, they wear the mask of the crowd. The crowd is seductive. It offers comfort. It offers certainty. When you're part of the crowd, you don't have to think too deeply. You don't have to wrestle with existential questions. You just follow the script. You inherit opinions. You mimic behavior. You adopt morals that were pre-approved. And in return, you get the warm embrace of belonging. But that embrace often comes at the cost of your soul. Kierkegaard warned that the crowd is not just a collection of people, it's a force. A psychological gravity that pulls you away from your inner self and into a diluted version of existence, where truth is replaced by consensus and depth is replaced by convenience. He called it the public, and he said that when the individual merges into the public, they lose their sense of accountability. They stop asking, "What is true for me?" and start asking, "What will keep me accepted?" And that subtle shift is the beginning of despair. This is a hard truth to swallow, especially in a time when being yourself is marketed as a lifestyle. But look closer. Much of what passes for individuality today is just a curated version of conformity. We're told to stand out, but only in ways that are socially rewarded. We're told to speak our truth, but only if it doesn't make others uncomfortable. We're given freedom of expression, but within invisible boundaries. And so, we perform. We become characters in a play no one is willing to admit they're in. And slowly, we forget what our true voice even sounds like. But why is the crowd so powerful? Because deep down, we fear isolation more than we fear self-betrayal. We fear the pain of being misunderstood, rejected, or left behind. Kierkegaard called this the sickness unto death, the despair of not being oneself, while knowing deep down that something essential has been lost. And yet, to step away from the crowd is to step into a terrifying solitude. It's to walk into the wilderness of your own being, where there are no guarantees, no applause, and no map. That's what makes freedom so terrifying. It doesn't come with a community. It doesn't come with applause. It comes with a mirror. And when you finally look into that mirror, stripped of all your social masks, you're faced with the question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Who am I really? Not who your parents told you to be, not who your culture rewards, but who you are when there's no one left to impress. That's the Kierkegaardian self, the true self. And most people would rather lose themselves in the noise of the world than confront that silence. But here's the paradox: the more we conform to the crowd, the more isolated we actually become, because no one ever truly knows us. They only know the version we present. And behind that mask, we begin to feel invisible, even in a room full of people. That's the hidden loneliness of conformity. You're surrounded, but you're not seen. You're praised, but not loved. You're accepted, but not understood. And over time, that emptiness builds. It eats away at you. Because no external validation can fill the void left by the abandonment of your own truth. So the real question isn't whether you belong to a group. The real question is, does the group allow you to be yourself? And if it doesn't, if it demands that you shrink, or lie, or pretend, then what exactly are you gaining by staying? Belonging that costs your soul is not belonging. It's imprisonment. And the longer you stay in that prison, the harder it becomes to even imagine freedom. Kierkegaard believed that the self is not something you find, but something you create, through choices, through struggle, and through radical honesty. And that creation can only happen in solitude, in the space where you are forced to take full responsibility for your existence. Not blame the crowd, not hide behind roles, but stand naked before the abyss of freedom and say, "This is who I choose to be." And that choice will cost you. You may lose people. You may lose certainty. You may lose the illusion of safety. But what you gain is something far more valuable: yourself. Not the version shaped by the world, but the version forged by fire, the one who is not afraid to live without permission. So ask yourself, when was the last time you made a decision that was truly yours? Not influenced by pressure, not shaped by fear, but born from the deepest part of your being. And if you can't remember, then whose life are you really living? The weight of possibility, why infinite choice feels like a curse, not a gift. We've been told that more choice means more freedom, that the more options you have, the more control you have over your life. But somewhere along the way, that promise began to break down. Because instead of feeling liberated by all the possibilities laid before us, we feel paralyzed. We scroll endlessly through career paths, relationships, philosophies, diets, worldviews, each one whispering, "This could be your life." And yet, we choose nothing. Or worse, we choose something half-heartedly, haunted by the infinite lives we didn't live. Kierkegaard saw this coming. Long before the age of the internet or consumer capitalism, he warned that the anxiety of possibility is not freedom's reward, it's its burden. Possibility is beautiful in theory. It's romantic. It glows with potential. But the truth is, the more possible lives you can imagine, the harder it becomes to fully commit to any one of them. Because choosing one means killing the rest. And we are not taught how to grieve the lives we didn't live. We are not taught how to mourn the people we could have become. Instead, we're encouraged to keep our options open, to hedge our bets, to dabble in everything but dive into nothing. And in doing so, we become spectators of our own lives, always circling the edge of commitment, afraid that the next option might be better. Kierkegaard called this the dizziness of freedom. It's that vertigo you feel when you stand at the edge of infinite paths, knowing that each step forward is also a step away from something else. And because we don't want to feel that loss, we stall. We hesitate. We try to keep all doors open, not realizing that time itself is quietly closing them. Every day we delay a decision, we are deciding by default. Every refusal to choose is still a choice with consequences, with costs. And yet we avoid the responsibility, clinging to possibility as if it were a comfort, when in reality, it's a weight we were never meant to carry endlessly. This is why Kierkegaard believed that real freedom only begins after the choice. Because freedom isn't found in keeping all paths open, it's found in walking one path with full presence, in committing. But commitment is terrifying in a world obsessed with potential. We're told that the more talents we have, the more we should do, that settling is failure, that specialization is limitation. But what if that's not true? What if the most meaningful life isn't the one where you explore every possibility, but the one where you go deep into a few? What if freedom isn't about maximizing options, but about discovering depth within limitation? Ask yourself this: how much of your anxiety comes from having too few choices, and how much from having too many? When you think about your future, do you feel inspired or overwhelmed? When you look at others who seem to have chosen a clear path, do you envy their clarity or pity their narrowness? And underneath all of that, do you trust yourself enough to commit? Because that's what it comes down to. Infinite choice only becomes a curse when you don't believe in your own ability to choose well. This is why people cling to external structures, why they ask others what they should do, why they look for signs, for rules, for 5 steps to certainty. Because choosing means taking full responsibility for the outcome. It means no longer blaming your parents, your culture, or fate. It means saying, if this fails, it's on me. And most people, if we're honest, would rather suffer under someone else's choice than risk failure under their own. But that kind of safety is an illusion. Because even when you outsource your decisions, you live with the consequences. Kierkegaard believed that anxiety itself is not the enemy. In fact, he called it the dizziness of freedom, because it's the proof that you are free. It's the signal that you are standing before real possibility. And the only way to escape that anxiety isn't to run from it, it's to choose, to leap, to act in faith, not certainty. Because faith, for Kierkegaard, was the only response to the absurdity of existence. Not blind belief, but bold commitment in the face of uncertainty. The kind of faith that says, I don't know what will happen, but I will stake my life on this path. That's not weakness. That's the deepest strength a human being can have. So if you feel overwhelmed by options, good. It means you're alive. It means you're awake. But don't let that overwhelm become a trap. Don't let the beauty of potential rob you of the beauty of becoming. Choose something. Own it. Walk into your life knowing that you could have chosen differently and still deciding to be here fully. Because in a world of infinite doors, the one you walk through is the only one that becomes real. The leap of faith, Why true freedom requires you to jump without certainty. At the heart of Kierkegaard's philosophy lies a single, radical idea, that the defining act of human freedom is not choosing between options, but making a leap. Not a calculated step, not a guaranteed outcome. A leap. And what makes a leap terrifying is that there's no bridge, no safety net, no confirmation that you'll land where you hope to. You leap because you must, because standing still is no longer bearable. But here's the paradox: only the person who leaps truly lives. We spend so much time trying to eliminate uncertainty. We want guarantees. We want to know that the job will fulfill us, that the relationship will last, that the path we choose will yield the outcome we desire. But Kierkegaard says that's not how life works. Life isn't a math equation. It's a mystery. And if you wait for certainty before you act, you'll wait forever. Because the only way to know is to do. And even then, you won't know in the way you hope. You won't get assurance. You'll get experience. You'll get transformation. That's why Kierkegaard distinguishes between two kinds of people, the aesthete and the knight of faith. The aesthete is the one who waits, who keeps every door slightly open, who samples life but never commits, who avoids pain at all costs. They are clever, charming, and often admired. But underneath it all, they are empty, because they've never risked anything real. They've never leapt. The knight of faith, on the other hand, is the one who dares to choose without knowing, who plunges into the unknown, not because they're sure it will work out, but because they know they must live authentically. They live with anguish, but also with depth, with meaning, with soul. And this is where Kierkegaard becomes deeply practical. Because he's not just talking about abstract philosophy, but he's talking about your life, your relationships, your purpose, your identity. He's asking, what do you believe in so deeply that you're willing to act on it without proof? What truth feels so real to you that you'd stake your life on it, even if no one else agrees? That's the leap. It's not reckless. It's not blind. It's the most conscious act a person can make. A decision not based on external validation or empirical facts, but on inner necessity. Have you ever made a leap like that? Have you ever said yes to something that made no logical sense but felt undeniably right? Or have you avoided the leap, waiting for more signs, more clarity, more time? Kierkegaard would say that the delay is the slow death of the self. Because the self is not something you find, it's something you create through commitment, and through action, through the courage to move, even when the ground beneath you is invisible. This is why real freedom is so rare. Because it requires not just escape from chains, it requires the will to leap into uncertainty. And that's terrifying. But it's also the beginning of everything. Of love, your courage, or purpose. Of faith, not religious faith necessarily, but existential faith, the kind that says, though I walk into darkness, I will not turn away. That's what separates the passive observer from the actual soul living their truth. So ask yourself this: what leap have you been avoiding? What path keeps calling you, even though it terrifies you? What have you been waiting for certainty to do when you already know, deep down, what must be done? The truth is, you'll never be ready. The leap is never safe, but it is sacred. Because in that moment of surrender, when you stop trying to predict or control and instead step fully into your freedom, you become something rare. You become real. And that's where the terror ends and life begins.